it took a bit of an external trigger, a bit of a life quake for me to wake up. And in my case, it was a health scare. The doctors had a look and said, "You need to get surgery." I said, "1 second, I need to check my calendar."
Welcome to Unstoppable Brain. I'm Dr. Kyra, and we're here to translate neuroscience into behavior change and the life you want. Today, our guest is Dr. Anne-Laure Le Cunff, neuroscientist, founder of Nest Labs, former Google exec, and author of an amazing book, Tiny Experiments. This book is being followed by her over 100,000 followers who are doing these tiny experiments, which is the closest thing I've seen to my own research into lasting behavior change. Basically, everything out there besides this stuff is performative. It's short, quick fixes that lead to really high relapse. So I'm excited for what you're going to learn in this conversation. And you're going to have kind of the unlock for things that you didn't think you would be able to do. Dr. Anne-Laure, this is a book that scared me, I have to say, and we'll get into why. But I swear I have read so many books in my life, so many self-help books, science books, productivity books, all those things. And I was shocked that you actually made me uncomfortable, especially towards the end. And we'll get into that. But I want to start with just introducing you. You can introduce yourself, but what I know about you, neuroscientist, very successful author. Congratulations on the book. It's an amazing book and it's being well received. I can tell all over the place. And you are the CEO founder of Nest Labs, which is a startup in the space. And so anything I missed on that you wanted to kind of, just put into the pie so that people understand who you are?
That's a really good introduction. I think maybe the only thing I would add is that I ended up working on what I'm working through a fairly non-linear path. So I didn't start working in neuroscience. I started working in tech. I was at Google. I worked on a couple of startups, and I went back to university to study neuroscience in my late 20s. I did my master's degree and then my PhD, and now I'm a researcher at King's College London. So this was a little bit of a career slash life pivot for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to understand, what causes somebody to have such a big bend in the trajectory of their interests, their career, especially when you have all the accolades of working for Google. You talked about, crowd pleaser kind of things in your book. And so what was it that really woke you up out of that? Because the default obviously is to go along with the success and the accolades and the comfort, so that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I realized on my own that something was wrong with the way I was approaching my life and my career, but it took, as is the case for many people, it took a bit of an external trigger, a bit of a life quake for me to wake up. And in my case, it was a health scare. So I was working at Google and I was really proud and happy to work there. I had a great team. I was working on great projects, and as you said, it that kind of job comes with recognition, the accolades, everybody around you telling you what a great job, that's amazing, what a great career you're building. So I was really happy, but I was also pretty obsessed with being successful in that job, which meant that for me, my work had become my number one priority. And I was ignoring some other aspects of my life, including my health. So one
Mm.
day I was brushing my teeth and I noticed in the mirror that my entire arm had turned purple.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't really happen overnight, which shows you how I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah.
So I went to the Google infirmary and they had a look at my arm and they said, after one look, they said, "You have to go to the hospital." So I went to the hospital in Stanford and the doctors had a look and said, "You need to get surgery straight away. You have a blood clot in your arm that's threatening to travel to your lungs."
Oh my gosh.
And in that moment, how did I respond? I said, 1 second, I need to check my calendar.
Oh my.
This this was kind of like, almost like an out of body experience when you see
Yeah.
yourself do something completely absurd, where you almost wonder, "Who is this person
Yeah.
who thinks that their to-do list is more important than their health?" And so for me, that was the trigger, the life quake when I started reconsidering my priorities, and, I ended up leaving Google, and, I worked on a couple of startups. I ended up being fairly lost. I went from having a very clear idea of what success was supposed to look like to not having a clear plan, not having a blueprint I could copy paste.
Mhm.
And it's funny you talked about my book earlier saying that this was very scary because to me, this moment of being completely lost should have been scary, but it ended up being one of the most liberating moments of my life.
Who was with you and who did you lose? Because sometimes when, people make such a huge change, there is the reason why we don't change is that we're afraid that we're going to be abandoned and betrayed by everybody that we know. So, what did your world shape up around you? Did everybody kind of get on board? We're like, great. Did some people challenge you? Did some people think you were crazy? How did that pan out?
I know it's going to sound cheesy, but for me, the hardest was my mom's reaction
Oh yeah.
because she she was terrified about this
Mm,
decision I was making. I
mhm,
think there was also a sense for her of almost a failure as a mother, in the sense that she always said that all she wanted in life for us was to make sure that we had a good job, that we were able to put food on the table, have a roof over our head, build a family, all of those traditional markers of success. But for her, that were more than that, that were markers of safety. And she wanted me to be safe.
mhm,
And all of a sudden, I was throwing
mhm.
all of that out of the window. And I
Yeah.
think she thought that was reckless. And she thought I was headed for the homeless shelter.
Yeah, yeah, and in Western society, there's this real, as a parent of, late 20s kids, almost 30 this next year, there's such a solace that comes from your kids doing well and such a terrible fear. I once heard somebody say, a great meditative teacher, Jack Kornfield was quoting this author saying, no matter how old we get, our mothers always are concerned about how we're doing. And so it's definitely a pressure that we feel, and also that as a mother, I feel around my kids. So I could imagine that, in our society where we don't have ideas about rites of passage, walkabouts, the closest thing is like the astrological community of like Saturn returns, where you kind of have to go into the wilderness as a young person and find yourself. We as parents don't have that mental model, if you will, of recognizing it, A, and being comfortable with it, B. And so, now where you're at, where's your mom at? What, is she on board? Are you still making her nervous? Like where's things these days?
It's exactly as you describe it, right? It's those ideas of cycles, really, the hero's journey. And now that I've gone through the valley of doubt, and that I'm back on the other side, and coming back with everything I've discovered and learned, she's actually okay with it, and she's really
Mhm,
happy for me.
mhm.
But she's she's happy because she sees that I'm safe and I'm happy. I have, quote unquote, again using the same metaphor, right? I have returned, and so she's fine with the decision that I have made. But while I was in the liminal space, the in between, the transition, when I was still trying to figure it out and it was very messy, she was really worried. So it is really something when you make those kinds of decisions. It is really something where you will very often have to go through a transitional period that can feel quite lonely, and it's
Yes.
only when you come out on the other side that you can reconnect with a lot of people that are close to you and say, "Look, I'm okay, and I might be a bit of a different person from who I was before I decided to make that journey, but I'm back."
So I'm mixed race Native American, And my tribe is Ojibwe, but a tribe close to ours is the Lakota, and they have a phrase for this moment in life called the wall of grief. And they say that you can't get through the wall of grief unless somebody who's been through the wall of grief pulls you through. So for you, A, who pulled you through? And B, how do you pull other people through now that you've been through that? Like, how do you recognize it in you've got this huge community that, you're leading and you're fostering and you're serving. And you probably see this happen to other people all the time because they're attracted to your story because they can trust that you've been there.
I was very, very fortunate that when I found myself in that transitional phase, I also stumbled upon a really lovely corner of the internet, which was on Twitter at the time, which is now kind of scattered around. I would say maybe a bit more on Substack these days,
Mm.
but a corner of a community of people that I would qualify of creative nerds. So people who love to create, who love to explore, who love to innovate, but who also really love to go deep, to ask interesting questions, to nerd about stuff together. And to me, finding this community in that moment of transition was really instrumental in the sense that all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't alone in that journey, that a lot of people were
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. And yeah, it was a very, very supportive community. It was also on Telegram at the time. I don't know if you've ever used it, but there were all of these little chat groups and people were sharing prototypes of tools that they were building and sharing resources and supporting each other. It really felt like the early days of the internet,
Mhm.
and it was extremely helpful. So I think those transitions can feel very lonely, but they don't have to be lonely. And if you're lucky, you will find a community, a little tribe, even if it's an online tribe that will lift you and support you while you go through this journey.
Yeah, and just this is where you terrified me because in the book, you basically said two things that scared me. One was to be imperfect out loud, and it made me realize that this podcast is my imperfect out loud, like in public, failing in public kind of thing, iterating in public, really, because I don't really believe in failure, but just doing that in broad daylight and asking for feedback to improve it because it is a collective experience, like I don't want to put out I have no ego around this. Like I do not want to have something that's not helpful or interesting, and so my objective, as I was reading your words, as I was reading your writing, which is very positive, by the way, and I'll get to that in a second, was to challenge myself to do this podcast as a collective, and how that really was nerve-wracking for me for two reasons. One, because I've been a creative person my whole life and an entrepreneur my whole life. My first business was as an 8-year-old raking leaves and having my neighborhood kids rake leaves also and paying them. I was a terrible business owner because I wasn't consistent, but I had the instinct, I had the impulse. And people copied me throughout my childhood, throughout my teenhood, throughout my young adulthood, and even in my adulthood. I was somebody who people would copy, but then they wouldn't cite me. Like I don't mind if they copy me, but then they wouldn't cite me. They would just steal. And it really
Mm.
bothered me, so that terrified me when I read your challenge, which I was really drawn to. I was like, "Oh, I really wanna do this with others. I really want to hear and shape this and co-design this together, but I'm scared. I'm really scared, to do that and to be vulnerable in that way." And so, how did you get was it just natural for you to kind of go to community and to do that with others? Was the nerd out with others? Or was there any point where you felt like it was a little too strong, for you to do that with other people, afraid of criticism? And you do mention that in the book in terms of our fear of being judged. So how was that for you?
Yeah, it's when I talk about learning in public, a lot of people might assume that I talk about straight away going from zero, you on your own in front of your computer, working in your garage with the garage doors closed, to sharing your work with millions of people. And that's not what
Mhm,
I'm saying. I think it can be very progressive.
mhm,
And you almost need to kind of build your immune system
mm,
so you're able
I
to
like
take
that.
all of the good in, yeah,
Mhm,
and protect yourself from the inherent harshness of putting your work out there, where not all feedback is going to be nice, not everybody's going to be nice
mhm,
with you. And so for me, it's been really helpful to first really share my work in those smaller online spaces. I was posting on Twitter, but because of the kind of work I was sharing and the kind of people who were interested in that kind of work, it actually never reached a lot of people at the beginning because it was
mm,
very, very nerdy. And I was posting a lot of the work in progress and the first drafts in, again, private Telegram groups where we were maybe a few hundred people in there, but curated the kind of people who had the same kinds of curiosities and desires for learning. And then I started writing my newsletter, and that started growing, but also, again, at a pace that is quite different from going viral on YouTube, for example. With a newsletter,
mhm.
it's quite slow. You grow a few more hundreds, a few more thousands every month, and so you have time again to build that immune system. And so I've been very fortunate that most of the feedback that I got was constructive, not
Mm,
always agreeing with what I was sharing, but constructive. The moment when it's become a little bit harder to manage for me, and which is not in the book because it happened when the book came out, was when I started being on podcasts or on bigger YouTube channels. And all of a sudden, my work started reaching an entire new audience that
mm,
had no background, no context about who I was. And I started receiving comments about my accent or my appearance or doubting my credentials or um, the kind of things that feel so silly. And to me, the biggest learning was that I really thought that when it would happen, I would not care. And it turns out I cared. I actually cared.
yeah, yeah,
And it took me a while to get used to it and to learn to ignore those comments and to focus on the constructive ones, but I did care the first couple of months when my book came out, and I was scrolling through those comments, and I did care about all of the feedback, including the one that was, I can see now, genuinely designed just to hurt.
yeah. I absolutely am with you. There's a comment on my book that, somebody said, like, "Well, this is ridiculous. This author thinks that everything is solved through iteration." And part of me was like, "Well, at least you understood my point." But I didn't understand why that's a criticism. Maybe it's going over my head. So what did you do to care for yourself? Like, that's a very lonely experience because it is, talk about neuroscience, it is definitely, we're wired for belonging. Any signal that we are under threat, is ancestral. It draws upon very old neuromachinery of, I'm going to be thrown out of the village or the clan, and I'm going to freeze to death or starve to death out there in the wilderness. So how do you, you're very, very self-aware. Like, you have got such a great metacognitive muscle, and I can tell, but how do you deal with that? How did you use those skills that you have to deal with that very uh, terrible experience, but very common experience, unfortunately?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned metacognition because I think it is a big piece of the puzzle. Really taking the time to deconstruct those emotions, understand where they come from, where they stem from, the underlying feelings and mechanisms that make you respond in this way when you receive those types of comments. For me, it takes the form of journaling. So I journal every single morning. I wake up, it's the first thing I
Nice.
do. So I make myself a cup of coffee. Actually, I need to change. I should stop saying this because it's been 48 hours I've been trying to stop drinking coffee in the
All
morning.
right. I want to hear
So
more about
yeah.
that.
So a cup of tea. right now, cup of tea, and yeah, and I journal every morning. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it can be an entire hour depending on what I have to unpack. And in those difficult moments, I was journaling for a lot longer in the morning because there was a lot to process. So that's one part, but I it's not enough. You also need to feel safe at an embodied level. You can spend all of the
Mhm,
time you want thinking about it, processing it at a cognitive level. That's never going to
mhm,
be enough. As you
mhm.
mentioned, we're social animals, and so you really need to feel that sense of safety. And this is the social aspect of managing those challenging periods of times in your life. For that, it's really just about surrounding yourself with people who kind of validate your worth, who show you love, who show you care, who support you, and that can be friends, that can also be very close colleagues, that can be your partner. The type of relationship doesn't matter as much as the quality of the relationship, and you want relationships that have depth and
Mhm.
that are really, really deeply human. So making time for nurturing those relationships. And what's really sad is that when we go through those challenging moments, one of our instincts is also to hide to others that we're going through that because we want to be perceived as the strong, resilient individual in the
Exactly. Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And so it does take a bit of an effort to say, to raise your hand and to say, I'm not doing too great right now.
Mhm.
And I kind of need to feel held and to feel supported.
What was the kind of unlock for you to what was a moment maybe that you were vulnerable in a way that, because of that, I'll call it cyberbullying, in personal bullying, where were you where did that unlock more vulnerability than you had thought you had in you?
Definitely with my friends. I used to be the person who so I love hosting. I love hosting dinners at my place. And I used to want it to be absolutely perfect. So I would invite people over and make sure we had great food, great music, and I would really, spend quite a bit of time trying to think about how to design the perfect experience for my guests. And this year, I had quite a few dinners at my place where it was just takeaway, hanging out in our pajamas, and I just told
I love
everyone,
it.
"I just wanna spend time together, but I have 0 energy. I can't do anything else."
I love
And my
it.
friends actually said that they loved it.
That's awesome. Pajama party. I love it. I mean,
Yes.
that's I love that you break down those, really artificial walls of, how we need to be in order to be alive. And, I just wanted to go back to your book for a second because you mentioned with Shonda Rhimes, chapter 6, um she says, "If I'm succeeding in one life area, it means I'm failing another area, and it is completely okay." And I would just jumped out of my skin. I was like, "Yes, absolutely," because in my own experience, my childhood was just, perfectionism on steroids. Never good enough. Nothing was good enough. I remember getting straight A's as a fourth grader, straight A pluses except for 1 A minus, and my parents noticed the A minus, and they're like, "What's this?" And so I'm sure many people experienced some version of that in this world. And so talk about how do you get comfortable with in your own imperfection when our childhood conditioning, our, negative self-talk is so loud around the perfection to keep us safe? Like how do you, help people through that?
Yeah, I think there are 2 parts to this. The first one is really learning to decouple our sense of worth from our productivity, from what we contribute to
Amen.
society.
Amen.
Uh,
Mhm.
and that takes a lot of work because we've all been raised in a society that is telling us that the way you prove your worth, and that kind of connects to what you were saying earlier about the fear of being rejected from the tribe, to not belong, which can be absolutely terrifying. And so the way we prove that we belong and to say, please, let me stay basically, is to be productive, to contribute to
Mhm.
society. So that
Mhm.
does take a lot of work. And again, that does take beautiful and deep human relationships where you keep on showing to each other that you will keep on loving and supporting each other and working together and doing whatever your relationship is based on, not based on what you're both contributing, but based on the inherent value of the relationship because you deeply value each other as
Mhm.
human beings. And
Mhm.
those make for the best relationships. And I'm talking again about personal and professional relationships because
Mhm.
when you look at the most successful co-founders, for example, they're the ones that are able to stay together even when things get really, really challenging. So that's number one, decoupling your sense of worth from your productivity. And second, it's really about building that muscle that it kind of that it's almost like a little dance, knowing that it's impossible for you to be 100% perfect all the time, but that you will actually be able to maintain long-term excellence if you're comfortable with that little dance, knowing that
Mhm.
sometimes you will have to give a project your full attention, which means that you might not be able to show up in be the perfect partner at home for a week because you're focused on that big presentation.
Yeah.
And knowing that sometimes there's your kid's recital or that there is a friend's wedding, something really important where you want to be fully present and you can tell your colleagues at work, I'm not going to be 100% focused on work this week because I have this other part where I want to give my energy and my attention. What's great is that when you become comfortable with that little dance, you also become more comfortable communicating it to others and
Mhm.
just by managing those expectations by saying, "Hey, I'm probably only going to be 70% here this week." People know, and this way they can organize themselves, and people are not going to blame you for not being 100%. So you remove pressure from yourself to be perfect all the time across every single area of your life, and
Mhm.
you also make everybody's life easier around you.
It's almost like you're giving permission to other people to be imperfect themselves when you are vulnerably being imperfect with them and just using that language. Um, I could even feel like my body relaxing, just like, ah, and that's how I felt, going back to your writing style. I, did Buddhist meditation in my late 20s onward, and there was a, specific writing style that I liked in some of the, um, authors in that genre, which is this kind of like, you could do this and you can do that. It's a very can empowered, like you have all these options, you have all this opportunity, and you can do this, all of that stuff without being rah rah. You can do this. Like it's just it's really beautifully woven into the way that you write. And I was wondering, as a reader, where that comes from in you. Was that through meditation practice? Was that through just even doing battle with your own mind in this way and kind of coming through the, I'll say, illusion of this performative society that we're all baking in and being pressured by? Like, is it that you liberated yourself and then that kind of comes through in your language? Like, do you even know this about yourself? Have you ever been told have you ever been told this about yourself? Like, just what would you say about that? Like, what are the connection points there?
Well, first I'll say thank you because it's one of the best compliments I can get about my work. I really, really try to not be prescriptive.
Yeah.
I don't think I have the keys to tell someone, here's the blueprint to be happy in your life. Generally, I know it can sound trite to say this, but everyone is actually different and going through different things, different experiences, a different situation, different traumas, different dreams,
Yeah.
aspirations. And so telling them, here's a framework you can just copy paste and you'll be happy is first incredibly arrogant, and second is also almost a bit dishonest, I think,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
So I what I try to give people is more of a series of tools so they can build their own toolbox depending on what they're trying to achieve, knowing also that the tools that are working for them today, for who they are today in their current circumstances, might not be the same tools that work in the future. And so you can keep on adjusting that toolbox depending on your situations and how you grow and you evolve. And where this comes from, um, I think part of it comes from how many times I've been disappointed with methods where someone comes and tells you either in a book or a podcast that this is the solution. Just do this and you'll be
Mhm.
happy. And then when it
Mhm.
doesn't work, you think that you did something wrong, surely, right? If it seems to work for everybody else and it's not
Right.
working for you, you're the one to blame. And so you end up in a situation where not only your challenges are not addressed at all, but you feel even worse about yourself. So that's one part of it. And the other one is having retrained in the scientific method, I do find it a lot more productive approach, and not in a toxic productivity sense of you need to achieve and you need to find solutions straight away, but a genuinely more generative approach to start not from a clear outcome and having this clear vision and this clear plan, but start instead from a place of curiosity, starting from a
Mhm.
hypothesis, a research question where you say,
Mhm.
what might happen if I try this?
Mhm.
Would that be something that would work for me? Would that make my life better? And again, you mentioned you don't believe in failure, and I think I can really resonate with that in the sense that when you start from a place of curiosity, there's no binary definition of success and failure because you don't have this specific destination in mind you're supposed to get to.
Yeah.
All you're trying to do is to learn something. So whatever the outcome, if you learn something from the experience, then that's success, right? And so that's what I'm trying to really convey in my work, that we all have the agency to experiment, to try new things, to see what works, what doesn't, and then keep what works for you, discard the rest, and that ideally your toolbox in the end will be completely different from anyone else's toolbox because it will be uniquely yours.
I really love that every single tool that you put in the book is a mentally portable because you tend to design them around the rule of three, right? Which is the perfect like to go package of our memory is like three things. You have plus, minus. Next, you've got the perform like the different. Oh shoot, I had them all memorized, not because I was trying to be performative with this, but it just was easy to memorize. Persist, pause, pivot. There's all kinds of amazing
The
tools in your
head,
book.
heart, hand
Head,
also,
heart,
yeah,
hand, yeah, like, you just have so many layers of 3, and it's a smorgasbord, like, people can pick whatever they feel attracted to and drawn to, but in each case, I think that the underlying intention that was clear to me, at least, was, "Hey, I'm trying to offer some way out of suffering, of tension, of self-judgment, of fear, of, this kind of, like, restrictive, linear world that we're all, sitting in, this soup that we're sitting in. And it was really liberating, honestly. And again, like I said, challenging in some, it showed me my crispy parts, with places where I'd become, quite fixed, and I didn't even see it until this mirror came up, from you. So another area on that for me was chapter 11, learning in public. So just to give you kind of an anchor point. You said studies have shown that announcing a goal has the unfortunate effect of making you less likely to complete it. Making a pledge to conduct your experience in public makes you complete it. I was confused there. So help me unpack that if you do remember. And I don't want to put,
yeah.
there's many, many words in this book. I don't want to put you on the spot of like perfect recall or anything like that. And I'm sure that
No,
you've
no, no,
changed
that's
a lot
fine.
since then. But what, help me understand that because we're
Yeah.
really aligned on like the no goals thing. Like, I'm so with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you're talking about perfect recall. This is one of the main reasons I'm trying to not use AI too much when I'm writing anything
Amen.
because I
Oh
will
my
not be
gosh.
able to remember any of it.
No,
Whereas, yeah, I wrote every single word here, so I
me
remember.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So what I mean here is that so there are studies showing that if you announce your goal, so if you say, I will lose that I will lose 10 kilos. I don't know the imperial system, so I'll use kilos. I will
20
lose 10
pounds
kilos. Yeah,
about.
20 pounds.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
thank you. I will lose I will lose 20 pounds by the end of the year, or I will run a 42 kilometers, whatever. I will do this.
Mhm.
And that's the goal, right? That's the binary definition of success or failure. You're
Mhm.
less likely to actually do it because everybody's going to congratulate you on saying, oh, wow, so ambitious. You're the kind of
Mhm.
person who's going to run a marathon. You're the kind of person who's going to go on that strict diet. You're amazing.
Mhm.
Great.
Mhm.
Dopamine hit, you feel good, and you don't end up doing the actual thing. In contrast, if you announce a little pact or a challenge or an experiment you're going to do, which is more like, I will write 100 words every day this month,
Mhm. Mhm.
or I will walk around the block at lunchtime every day for the next 2 weeks, or I will action for duration. So, not a goal, but a little challenge, a little experiment, something that you need to show up and do. You're not going to get the response from people saying, oh, wow, you're the kind of person who's going to walk 10 minutes every day around the block for 30 days. Nobody, it's people are just going to be like, okay, cool. And so you end up wanting to do it because it's only impressive once you're done. It's only
I see.
after you've actually ridden every day for a
Yeah.
month that that becomes something impressive that you can boast about and be proud about. So it's a small shift, but by shifting your focus from announcing the big shiny goal to actually just telling people, here's this thing I'm planning on doing this month, you're not going to get the same dopamine hit and you're going to be more likely to actually do the thing.
So what that tells me is that you're trying to avoid flipping into this performative state. And, if you declare something really sexy, to put it that way, that you're going to get this like rush of like applause, that kind of crowd pleaser thing that you mentioned in the book. And then I got worried when you said the word pact, and I know how hard it is to find language that works for this kind of, teaching or this kind of sharing of information. So I totally there's no criticism here whatsoever. But I worried about the idea of pact because there's it's hard to find the right word for commitment to something, but also the right flex, if you will, a flexibility and slack in the system. So how do you think about the sort of, Goldilocks of, being in effort and committing to an effort, but then also if you do that publicly, that can set you up to later fail even in your own mind, even though it's not a public glorious failure of like she didn't do that marathon, you know, but it's more like, I said I would do something and I didn't do it, or I didn't do it the way I said I would do it. I didn't make the 100 days or whatever. And now I got to give myself grace. I've got to forgive myself. I've got to like reframe that so that it's better for me to not, in my work, it's all about the habenula. I'm obsessed with the habenula, and if you trigger the habenula, you lose your motivation and you feel like a failure, and you trigger it with failure. So it's this loop, right? Um,
Mm.
so I got worried there a little bit. Like, how do we protect people from even these small linear processes on our way to a loop? Have you
Yeah.
seen anything like that? And do you have any comments about
Yeah.
that?
Absolutely. So, two things. First, there's a hint in the title of the book, Tiny Experiments, where I
Mhm.
highly encourage, I really recommend to people to always start small when it comes to making a pact. And when you think about it, a pact makes a lot more sense and is a lot less kind of like crazy to do than when people commit to a habit. A habit has no duration. So you say, from today, I'm going to run 3 times a week for the rest of my life. And
Mhm.
people say that, commit to that, when sometimes they've never run more than 100 meters in their entire life. But they say, I'm going to do that. And then they fail and then they feel bad.
On January
Whereas
2nd.
when Exactly. Yeah, very often. Oh, I New Year resolutions, also something I talk about in the book. I am completely anti New Year resolutions.
We are
So with a
together.
pact, with a pact, you say, I will try this for this duration, ideally keeping the duration quite short. And so that's the first aspect. The second aspect is that PACT stands for Purposeful, Actionable, Continuous, and Trackable. That's the only acronym in the entire book. And the trackable is really important. It means tracking whether you did it or not. So
Mhm.
if you say, I'm going to write 100 words for 10 days. So action, writing 100 words every day for 10 days. What you're supposed to do here is just to track every day whether you did it or not. So again, success is not doing it for every single day. Success is just like a scientist, paying attention to what works and what doesn't. And so at the end of the 10 days, let's say you only wrote for 5 days. You can look back and look at those days and ask yourself, what was different about those days compared to the other days where I didn't write? Was it that I wrote in the morning, first thing, instead of doing it later in the day? Was
Mhm.
it that I slept better the night before?
Mhm.
Was it that I was reading an interesting book and I felt inspired and so it was easier to write? What was it? So that's again the metacognitive practice coming into play here. And so the pact is I talk about it in the book. In the book I say a pact is a commitment to curiosity. So it's
Mhm.
not a
Mhm.
commitment to doing the thing, it's a commitment to be curious about this particular action for the duration of the experiment and to learn what works and what doesn't for you. So when you announce to people, I'm going to do this, you're not announcing that, again, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to do this, I'm going to have this very specific definition of success with a specific destination. You say, I'm going to spend the next 10 days, next 2 weeks learning all about what works for me and what doesn't when it comes to writing or running or what it is whatever it is you're curious about.
I really think that the operant part of that sentence is what works for me and what doesn't. And I
Mm,
almost said that I almost wanna change it a little bit, or tweak it a little bit from I did it, I didn't do it, because I've run that experiment with people, mostly people who are on the lower, echelons of education and economics, because I tend to deal with more vulnerable populations. And what I was wondering as I was hearing you talk is what baseline like confidence of just life things that I've accomplished or been able to do is buoying somebody up as they face that question of like whether I did it or didn't, because it almost risks, for me coming from a vulnerable background, for me working with more vulnerable people who are less confident, who are more easily triggered into negativity, negative self-talk and things like that. I get really like protective of um you know it's not you, it's the thing you're trying, and almost distancing the self from the experiment in a way. And I'm wondering if it could be tweaked for those people who are not very confident, especially even if it's small, it even can backfire because like, oh, it's small and I couldn't even do the small thing, you know? And so, I've heard all these things from people that I've worked with and patients and things like that. And so I'm wondering if like, did it not work for me today
yeah.
or this time or something like that. I really like that language. And I said I'm attracted to that way of phrasing it for people who aren't coming to the party with a lot of confidence and the shaky knees and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're basically describing the experimental mindset that I talk about in the book. Really, when you think about a scientist who conducts an experiment in the lab and they don't get the result they expected, they don't go like, "Oh, I'm such a bad scientist. I'm terrible at my
Mhm.
job. What did I do
Mhm.
wrong?"
Mhm.
They just look at the result and they ask, "Huh, interesting. What happened? What
Mhm.
happened here? What can we
Yeah.
learn from this?"
Yeah.
And it's because they exactly what you're saying, right? They know they're not the experiments, that the data is separate from them, and that whatever the result says nothing about their own value as a human being. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think language is really important. And so that's also why, again, I don't want to be prescriptive. And I think any tool that I create is made to be tweaked, is made to be adapted depending on people's circumstances. So it's really, if as you said, they have lower confidence and the language of saying, did I do it or not, is not going to be helpful to them, then did that work or not could be better. And
Mhm.
so, yes, absolutely. I love that.
How much do you feel like you need to keep showing how imperfect you are, how imperfect your how much you are because you end the book like this. You're like, I don't have it all figured out. I really loved that humility. And I really, to me, humility is a very beautiful quality to cultivate as a human being. And vulnerability is a power, like I
Mm,
used to think the opposite. I came from arrogance and, competitive and comparative and all these things that were so toxic, and you and I are kind of like generally in the same, area where we've kind of let some of that go, or a lot of it go. And so what do you do to kind of role model or continue, because I'm sure that people project onto you that you're perfect. You wrote a book, you have all this notoriety, all these things, and of course you were at Google. Like I could never be there. You know what I mean? Like they almost use people like you as a way of putting themselves down, and you have to figure out it's not your job. You're not responsible for that. But is there anything you can think of like that helps that situation for you? Uh,
mhm.
your book is super approachable. Like how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky that I feel like people don't really tend to put me on the pedestals so much. So, it I do get a lot of, actually pretty pointed questions sometimes over email asking me what I mean, when I say something, or how would it apply to a specific situation. The one thing I try to be very careful about when I answer questions is that I always tell people I'm really just giving you tools based on what I've studied, I read, and my research, but also my lived experience. There's always going to be some of my lived experience in the work
Hmm.
that I do. It cannot be this perfectly objective tool that is going to work for everyone. And so take everything I say with that in mind, that I come to this conversation with my own past, with my own biases. Some of them I'm not aware of. And you really need to take that into account when you listen to me. And so take what's useful, tweak what is not so helpful to you, and keep on adapting those tools and even create your own based on your own situation.
I love that. I love that. I think that's such a voice of wisdom that you carry, in terms of like continually pointing people onto their path instead of getting distracted by you or anybody else. I mean, it's something that people just do sometimes, but it what it says to me is that you've been really effective at communicating um the human experience through your own story and giving people permission to live theirs and giving them tools to live theirs, which is incredibly liberating, incredibly powerful. Um, Thank you for that. And then the final thing I'll say is on the last chapter around life beyond legacy. This really tripped me up too. Like people, I'm at the point in my career where I'm motivated by uplifting other people, uplifting the next generation. I could be lazy and I could sit in my, comfy life and be there. But what drives me and what really resonated with me about this chapter is reaching out to others and caring about the up and coming generations in my case. That's what I'm really focused on, and how to uplift people who are trying to find their way. And you use the word generativity, which I've never heard that word, but when you described it in the book, the ability to transcend personal interests to provide care for those who are younger and older than you, just like being in Ojibwe language, there's this word called minimuyen, which is an older woman who kind of connects everybody and holds it all together, like holds the community together. And it doesn't have to be a woman, but that's the word for it, as a woman. And I was like, this is what I want. So how can I be more generative? How can I really shift from this idea of legacy, and can you unpack that a little bit for people, that we don't want a legacy, we want to be generative.
Yeah, the main difference in between a legacy and generativity is who is going to benefit from your work. And with focusing on your legacy, you're focusing on the next generations, as in people who are going to be on this planet after you're gone. And so it's very hypothetical. You're not even
Mm,
sure this is going to have any impact. And so it actually doesn't make a lot of sense to obsess so much over how we're going to be remembered when we're gone.
mhm,
And, it's still very natural, obviously, right? Because ultimately, we wanna feel like it mattered that we were here, that it made a difference that we were here. What I argue in the book is that it can matter that you're here, not focusing on your legacy, but focusing on generativity, focusing on the impact you can have right now in the present moment on the communities that share this planet with you right now. And that is more important than focusing on how you will be remembered when you're
yeah.
gone.
What do you think is the need right now? Like, our world is struggling in some ways, and it's also really beautiful in certain ways. Like, what do you see in your vision for our world, our society, and the changes that are coming? What do you think that need is that people can focus on, that people could serve?
I think focusing on your local community is where you can have the most impact, and so that can take many, many forms. I know someone who started a book club for young boys, for example, noticing that young boys don't read books anymore, and so helping
Oh,
them read
wow.
more, which I
Yeah,
think is going to have an amazing positive impact on this generation right now and in the future. I yesterday I had dinner with someone who told me about this amazing organization called More Than Human Life, who are rewriting laws to protect forests and animals in the same way we protect human beings.
I love that.
And, I love that as well, and so it's a bunch of lawyers who are using everything they learned, in their very traditional type of education and applying it to extend that to other forms of life on Earth. And so I can't I could keep on listing different areas where you can be generative, but I think what's more important is to find something that first really resonates with your values and what you think is important and the kind of world you want to live in. And second, something that you can do right now with whatever resources that you have at your disposal. And so that could be quite small, that could be very local, that could be with your community, literally just your neighborhood.
Hmm.
That can be very generative. And if you have more resources, if you have a larger network, if you're well connected to people who are decision makers, leaders who can maybe have an impact at a larger scale, then maybe that's the kind of generativity you want to focus on. But there's not one that's better than the other. The only thing that makes generativity so powerful is that you're focusing on the impact you can have right now in the present moment.
And you talk about the different roles in a community, for example. And there was, I'm just going back to that. Where did my notes go on that? There was like the apprentice, what was the other three? The other
The
two.
artisan and the architect.
Correct. That was it. Yeah. So what if people are shy, that they hear you, they're like, wow, I want to do that, but maybe they get immediately intimidated, like, oh, I couldn't do that. I don't know where to start, kind of thing. And they even heard you say to start small, and they're still doubting themselves, not because of what you said, but because of, maybe what they struggle with. Um, talk about the apprentice, talk about the on-ramp, into such things that would allow you to be generative like that.
So you can start by just joining existing communities, which you think are doing great work. You just join and you participate, and that's it. Just by participating in existing communities, you're making those communities more alive. You're contributing your ideas, you're making them stronger. And that can be an amazing way to be generative. And you could start
Uh-huh.
here. And that would
Mhm.
already be so welcome. And the community leaders will be so happy to have you contributing to their community. So that's level 1, the apprentice. When you
Nothing
do
wrong with
that
being a follower, right? There's nothing wrong with being a
exactly.
follower. Yeah,
Absolutely
everybody needs
nothing
to
wrong at
follow
all.
sometimes. Yes. Mhm.
Yes. And then if you feel called to it, you can kind of graduate onto the next level, which I call the artisan, and which is when you start actually help craft the experience in the community. So that might be helping the community leaders host events, that can be moderating some conversations, that might be helping invite some people you might know to come and give talks, that can be helping with very sometimes, small logistical things like helping organize the schedule. There are so many things you can help with in a community. So volunteering your time in this way can also be a great way to contribute. And again, only if you feel called to it. And in some rare cases, you might become so passionate about the cause or whatever, you know, project the community is working on, and you might actually want to take on a bigger leadership role, what I call the architect. And this is when you're really starting to work on the vision of the community. And that can be as part of an existing community, or that could even be starting your own community from scratch. I do
Mhm.
tell people though that this is a lot of work, and you don't have to do that. And you should really only do that if you feel like this is absolutely needed and that this is something where you can see yourself dedicating a lot of time and energy over the next few years.
Yeah, it's almost sounds like the ratio, it's like that everyone can be, an apprentice. Some people will be artisans, and then a few people will be architects. Is that kind of how you see it playing out?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. So no pressure, everybody. Um,
Yeah.
Where are you iterating the most right now? Like, you're a really rapidly growing, changing being, right? And so you wrote the book, and I know in writing a book, it feels forever ago when you actually write it by the time it gets published, and then you're doing all of the promotions and things like that. How have you changed? And, who are you now? And what's your edge these days that you're, you know, mostly iterating on or have to do more iteration on that you would share?
Yeah. I would say two main parts where I'm iterating a lot at the moment. One of them is mostly, I would say, on the professional side of things. So I now have a book, a newsletter, a community. I have my social media, and I also get a lot of inbound requests from people asking for advice, consulting, workshops. And it's become a little bit chaotic, I would say, where I know I have so much to teach and to share, but I could really benefit, I think, from having a journey that makes a little bit more sense, both for me and for whoever wants to learn from my work. And so I'm trying to figure out what makes sense and at different levels. And by different levels, I mean both levels of curiosity and engagement and the need depending on the kind of projects people are working on, but also at a financial level, I do want my work to remain accessible to as many people as possible. So
Yeah.
what does that look like to have one format that most people can get for free? And then another format that is maybe a bit more in depth that people who want to go deeper can have access to that, and which would require a little bit more of my time and my attention. So that's one aspect I'm currently thinking about a lot. And the other one, actually I'm saying the other one, but they're very intertwined, is at a personal level. What do my days look like? And this year, again, because of all of those amazing opportunities, my schedule has been all over the place. And,
Yeah.
I wanna figure out in the next few months, what does it look like for me to rebuild a sense of calm, a sense of routine and having rituals again, where I can do my best work without feeling like I'm running around like a headless chicken.
Exactly. I mean, I think that this is where the performative monster comes in for me, which is that whenever there's a leveling up, and to me, you're describing a leveling up, like your world expanded. This book, and you made contact with the world. You already had 100,000 people following you and all of that, to deal with, to organize in your mind, and you still have the same 24 hours a day and 7 days a week that we all have, and you're trying to manage this influx, this surge of energy that you is a call and response between your book and the world, and they're like, "Yes, and we want you," "and we want you now. We want you in we want you in our living room. We want more of you," like all that kind of stuff. And so you tapped into a need, and you tapped into service. But now that's like, I grew up in the country, and we had dogs that chase cars, and it's like we have this saying, like, the dog who caught the car, like, what does the dog do when the car stops? And it's like, okay, I'm here. What do you want me to do? So I hear you describing this cacophony of energy coming in, and then growing your capacity, right, to meet that. So what iterations come to mind for you, um, that you think will be really important in this phase of this big influx?
So hiring first,
Hmm.
I decided to start working with someone who's very good at managing communities, but at a strategic level, and,
Nice.
we're going to start working together. So just, really embracing the fact that there are a lot of things about running this kind of business, this kind of educational platform where there are people who've done it before, and they know a lot more than I do, and so just working with the right kind of people. And also, really giving more, responsibilities and freedom to my existing team. So, to have processes where I would review a lot of things before they would go live, and, it was really working very closely together, and we're now building systems where we inject a lot more trust, where, they've been working with me for years, and they kind of know now what I think is okay to post on my Instagram and what is not okay. And so really for me trying to learn to let go of control a little bit, and especially when it comes to creative control, which is something I care about quite a lot. So I'm working on that and iterating and trying to figure out what is a good system for us, where I still feel like I have the space to express myself creatively and share my ideas and my work, but I don't have to micromanage every single aspect of scheduling a post on social media, for example. So
Hmm.
it feels very organic and a bit messy, but I feel like it's the generative kind of messy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can relate to so much of what you just said, just me being a founder as well. And I'm at the point where, like, I'm the bottleneck, I'm the problem, and just having to find different ways to scale. And you're right, in terms of, like, if you're going to scale, you have to trust others, and you have to empower them, right? And you got to let go, control a little bit, which is super scary, especially when something has come from birthed from your mindset, your mind, and you're kind of the maven, if you will, at the helm of all of this. So I wish you well on all of that. And I know that you have the tools and the intelligence and the self-awareness and the positivity. And if there's anything I can do to support you, let me know. This is my tiny experiment, this podcast. And I'm curious from you, how would I iterate on this? Like, how was this for you as a guest, and what improvement could you offer? You've done a lot of these, right? And I'm just beginning. I've done a lot of talking, I've done a lot of writing, things like that. How could I improve? How could I iterate on this to be A, more rewarding for my guests, which is what I want, and B, more memorable and interesting and valuable to those who take their time, their precious time to take this content in? Like, what would you say to me?
So you've already made it really memorable just by asking me this question. I've been on so many podcasts and nobody has ever asked me this question. So so I think first this is great. This is learning in public, right? It's really just asking this question, keeping on asking this question every episode, and even after 100 episodes, keeping on asking this question every time. What could I change? What could be better? Um, I think there are so many external aspects that you could focus on, asking me what could be better or asking the audience. And I think this is great to do that, right? Just sending feedback surveys and those kind of things. One thing I think is a little bit more interesting that I don't think enough people do is really listening to the internal signals and asking yourself after each episode how that felt for you. Because I
Nice.
think when it comes to those kind of when it's really your baby, your creation, and it's a labor of love, and if you want it to be sustainable, it's incredibly important that it feels aligned and that you're enjoying it. And so I think a little exercise, which again, as with all the tools that I share, you can tweak, but taking a few minutes after every recording to just write a few lines and really asking yourself very honestly, how did that feel? Would I want to have this now that I know how the conversation went? And then if you ask me to spend another hour having this conversation, would I say yes? Or would I try to find an excuse to get out of it? And just do
Mm,
that after each episode.
mm. Thank you. Thank you. And just really quickly, I feel relieved that I didn't mess up in the ways that I was totally terrified to mess up. I feel relieved that I was, authentic in looking through my papers and sometimes finding things and sometimes not finding things. I was worried in the beginning of boring you, like, because I know that you're super smart and you're really like, you made this time for me and that put pressure on me in my head. I feel really grateful. Um, I feel curious. I feel curious about where this could go. I think there's some things about it that I was like, that was really super cool and interesting. And there's some areas where I'm like, I'm a beginner. And so, giving myself grace and then working that problem. So thank you so much for that feedback, and thank you so much for the sharing of your time and your wisdom. And I just wish you the absolute best. I really honor your work and admire you. And yeah, thank you so much. You're such a dear person.
Thank you so much. I am truly, truly honored to be one of your first guests on your podcast. And this was a lovely conversation. So thank you for having me.